to a short video on the air permit key. I'm Kevin Vaughan and I'm here with Stanley, a 30-year veteran of air permitting. And Stanley's going to walk us through the flowchart to how to obtain an air permit. Thanks for being here, mate.
No problem, Kevin. Yes, so today we are discussing the air permit flowchart for new stationary sources. Here you can see the entire flowchart and you can navigate it by answering a series of yes or no questions. Decision points are in blue, action steps are in green, and many of the decision boxes have a link icon that take you to more information. Okay, so the first step in the air permit key is to ask if the activity is a new stationary source. If your application is for a project, such as the addition of a new emission unit at an existing stationary source, the best course of action is to contact the DEQ regional office for your location and get site-specific guidance.
Okay. So Stanley, we should probably mention right away that the AIR program uses some very specific terms that are defined by regulations, right? Like terms like stationary sources, and we're going to get into some other ones later on here. And as we get into the flowchart, people can access those regulations, like you said, through the links on many of the decision boxes.
That's correct, Kevin.
All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the next bit.
Okay. We've addressed the first section of the flowchart, so now let's look at the second section. The point here is to determine whether the new stationary source under consideration is actually the relocation of a facility previously permitted by DEQ as portable. In this context, portable means one or more emission units that are capable of being easily moved from one location to another, but that are stationary while in operation. If there is an existing portable permit and all the other criteria are met, then no new permit is required. Instead, just follow the notification requirements of the existing permit.
Okay, I think I've got it. So it's stationary while it's operating, but it can be moved around, so therefore it's portable. So can you give us an example of a new stationary source that's portable?
Yeah, probably the most common ones are new concrete batch plants as well as asphalt plants.
All right, cool. Let's go ahead and pick it up here and assume that the source is not portable.
If the site is not portable, we next ask if any emission units in the new stationary source are subject to either a NESHAP standard or a MAC standard.
Okay, NESHAP and MAC. So here's where some of those specific terms come into play. And just again, to see some of those definitions, click on the boxes there to review the regulations. And I do see links all over this section of the permit key.
Yes, that's right. You can click on the links to open the regulations and review specific details and definitions for each decision point. Basically, this whole part of the flowchart is describing the process for evaluating air emissions of 188 specific chemical compounds that are classified as hazardous air pollutants, or HAP, by the U.S. EPA, and as toxic pollutants by DEQ regulations.
Okay.
The trick is that while the list of federal HAP and Virginia toxic pollutants are the same, DEQ only regulates these compounds as toxic pollutants to the extent that EPA does not address them as HAP.
I see. Okay.
That's why the first question is to determine whether one of EPA's hazardous air pollutant rules, MAC or NESHAP, are applicable to any of the emission units. And it's important to note that for this section of the chart, the analysis should be repeated for each emission unit that will be part of the new stationary source.
Okay, I think I get it. We're starting to evaluate whether the air emissions for the new stationary source are classified as hazardous or toxic. And then we're starting to look at what rules apply because of that, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so let's say that, yes, there is applicability of NESHAP or MAC, and pick it up to the top part of that flowchart.
Sure. If there are emission units subject to NESHAP or MAC, the second question is then whether the affected unit is subject to EPA rules requiring pre-construction review. This generally means that that the units alone are major emitting.
Mm-hmm.
If so, a permit will be required and the associated regulatory review must be completed. If not, we proceed to the next step, where we consider whether any emission units are listed in the regulation with no exemption, meaning that they automatically require a permit.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, this is limited to incinerators and hazardous waste combustors.
Okay.
If no units automatically require a permit, we next consider EPA evaluated the source category of the emission unit and determined that no regulatory action was needed. If all the emission units that constitute the new stationary source fall under this designation or did not require NESHAP MAC pre-construction review, the HAP toxics review is complete and we proceed to the next step of the flowchart to evaluate criteria pollutants. However, any emission units that have not already been excluded must then be evaluated for toxic pollutants under DEQ regulations as specified in non-VAC 80-1105E1, and I apologize for that citation. This involves comparing the uncontrolled emission rate to the corresponding exemption level for each toxic pollutant emitted by non-excluded emission units. If any toxic pollutant emission rate is above the corresponding exemption level, complete the regulatory review and obtain a permit. If all of the toxic pollutant emission rates are below the corresponding exemption levels, the HAP toxics review is complete and we proceed to the next section. And of course, this has all been pretty complicated, so any questions you have about this HAP toxic section, you can address those questions to your local DEQ regional office.
Yeah, there is certainly a lot in there, but it can get very technical very fast. But I think you've done a really good job, Stanley, of breaking it down for us. And of course, folks will need to review some of the details of those boxes there once they get into the permit key. Okay, I think we're almost done, so let's go ahead and pick up the last part of this permit key and follow those yes decision points down.
All right. If a permit has not already been required for other reasons, the final step is to evaluate the criteria pollutant emissions from the new stationary source. In this part of the evaluation, any emission units that are exempt by size as specified in 9VAC 580-1105B are excluded. For each criteria pollutant listed in 9VAC 580-1105C, the uncontrolled emissions from any remaining units are then summed together and compared to the corresponding exemption level. If the combined emissions are greater than the exemption level for any pollutant, a permit is required and you move to the green action step of completing regulatory review. Otherwise, assuming a permit was not required as part of the HAP toxics review, the new stationary source would be exempt from permit requirements and you would follow the permit exemption procedures action step. And as a final reminder, the regulations do require new stationary sources that are exempt to maintain documentation demonstrating that exemption status. And so that's it. That's the whole process in a nutshell.
Okay, and here we are taken back to the full version of the flowchart. Well, thank you very much, Stanley, for joining us. I very much appreciate your time to walk us through the air permit key today. And remember, folks, if you need more information about air permitting, please visit the DEQ website. Thanks for watching.